This is the nature of things.
Until very recently, our best and brightest scientists and physicians believed that the adult brain couldn't change. Our brain circuits were formed and finalized in childhood. Now we discover that the brain is plastic, meaning changeable. But not all change is good. That changing brain can actually do us harm. Obsessive-compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and even schizophrenia. But the mind can harness the damaged brain's plasticity to change itself. And now we are finding new treatments for mental diseases and disorders once thought incurable.
When you would tell people, hey, this is your brain sending you a false message, it would help them.
We might actually change the whole course, the whole trajectory of someone's life.
This is medicine. This has outcomes that are medical. It changes brains physically. It changes them chemically. It changes them functionally.
There's a lot that can go wrong inside your head. Phobias, panic attacks, schizophrenia destroy lives. But scientists now know that the brain can change. It has the amazing ability to reorganize itself throughout life, allowing us to treat mental disorders.
My name is Dr. Norman Doidge, and I wrote a book called The Brain That Changes Itself. The discovery of neuroplasticity is the discovery that our brains can change their structure and function through mental experience alone. It signals the most important change in our understanding of the brain in 400 years, because for 400 years, we thought of the brain as though it were like a machine with parts, and that view of the machine-like brain gave rise to a neurological fatalism, because it meant people who were born with brain damage or who sustained brain damage as they developed were condemned to live with it, because machines do many glorious things, but they don't grow new parts, and they can't reorganize themselves. All of us have worries. We worry because we are intelligent creatures. The same intelligence that allows us to plan, imagine, hypothesize, also allows us to anticipate negative outcomes. There are many kinds of worriers, but among those who suffer the most are people with obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD. Their problem, though all in the head, goes far beyond what others might experience, precisely because it's in the head and therefore inescapable. It's a disorder that can often be treated by understanding neuroplasticity. This is the discovery of UCLA's Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz.
People get intruding into their stream of consciousness unwanted thoughts and urges. You basically have an inner conflict where you get ensnared in really bad obsessive-compulsive disorder because it gets worse and worse and worse the more you relent to it. So it's a nasty thing.
I would say that OCD basically feels like you're trapped in your own mind. It feels like there's almost like a puppeteer, really, kind of making us do things and rituals that we don't want to do, but we have to.
You're dealing with such a high level of anxiety and high level of stress that you physically are sick.
And this is happening day after day, hour after hour. It wasn't long before I fell into a depression.
Contamination fears, I constantly was washing my hands. It even got to the point where I would Lysol my head and face and arms and legs.
You end up falling apart.
I always felt guilty, which is part of my OCD, my feeling that I'm always doing something, sinful. And I found, oh, wow, I found a way to get rid of that feeling. I could pray to God and ask for forgiveness. I would pray throughout the day, even though, like, when I'm taking care of the kids, or I'm cooking, or I'm changing their diaper, I would say, oh, forgive me for this. And I would kept praying for the same thing over and over again. But when I pray, I didn't felt like I was forgiven. That guilty feeling never left me.
Cleaning and washing compulsions. When I first was starting to get those incredibly uncomfortable, anxious feelings and not knowing why, those were really difficult times where I was very low. I feel like I'm trapped and locked into this, and like I have to do this even though I don't want to. While I'm seeing people around me that aren't having to do this, what the hell is going on with me?
There's a worry circuit in the brain, and when we worry, three things usually happen. First, a part of our brain behind our forehead detects the mistake, and it sends a signal to another part of the brain called the anterior cingulate. The anterior cingulate makes you anxious about the mistake, so you'll stay focused on it until you've corrected. And finally, once you have corrected it, a third part of the brain called the caudate functions like a mental gear shift and shifts you on to the next thing. But in people with OCD, that mental gear shift is very sticky. It stays stuck, so they try to correct the mistake again and again. Each time they correct the mistake, their anxiety drops very briefly. Because neurons that fire together wire together, they get the idea that to lower anxiety, they should keep correcting the mistake. It works in the short run, but in the long run, it makes them more obsessive.
The vicious cycle of obsessive-compulsive disorder is the more you wash, the more you check, the worse it gets.
This makes a lot of plastic sense, because the more time he spends thinking about germs, the more he inadvertently wires the connection between germs and danger into his brain, rather than strengthening the thing he has to strengthen, which is that mental gear shift.
If the brain can get worse by people doing the symptom again and again, maybe if I can get them through understanding to resist acting on the urge, then they can strengthen alternative brain circuitry and quiet down the pathological brain circuitry, and that process, when done regularly, changes how the brain works.
Schwartz wondered whether patients could shift the caudate manually by first becoming aware they were having an OCD attack and then using their constant effortful attention to actively focus on something wholesome besides the worry.
Human beings uniquely have the capacity to have true insight, true awareness, the capacity to stand outside yourself, to use a term called the impartial spectator, and we are not what our brain is.
This ability to develop a third-party awareness is difficult to master, but the key to Schwartz's treatment.
The impartial spectator tells me it's not real. This is just the brain hiccuping, the brain doing what brain does.
But I always knew there was almost like a part of me, like a different me, that was sort of, you know, inside saying like, this is irrational. This is, you know, is a disorder.
Don't believe everything you think. I mean, don't believe everything you think turns out to be a very good one-liner for understanding obsessive-compulsive disorder, because your brain is making you think stuff that clearly is just due to a brain circuit gone rogue.
The therapy devised by Schwartz draws on ancient Buddhist teachings about mindfulness. Schwartz's treatment is divided into 4 steps to harness the plastic properties of the brain to work for the sufferer, not against him. The first step is for a person having an OCD attack to step back and mindfully relabel what's happening to him, so that he realizes that what he's experiencing is not a dangerous attack of germs, but an attack of OCD.
When I get an obsessive thought and a compulsive urge, that I can, you know, step 1, I can relabel it as such.
Call it OCD. Don't say, I have an urge to wash my hands. Say, OCD is causing me to feel like I have to wash my hands.
The next step is to reattribute those thoughts and urges to the pathological brain circuitry and to remember how brain lock occurs in the 3 parts of the brain.
So you reattribute the fear to something your brain is doing.
The 3rd step is to refocus, to manually turn one's attention away from the pathological thoughts and urges onto a constructive, wholesome behavior.
Whatever is bothering me, I go and do something else.
That's where the neuroplasticity comes in, because when you're using your brain now in a constructive way and focusing your attention in a constructive way, you stabilize alternative brain circuitry.
The final step occurs as you notice that your obsessions and compulsions are beginning to fade, and you revalue them, realizing they are worthless distractions to be ignored.
When you do that regularly, you really do start changing your brain. Now when you get the urge to wash, the urge to check, you no longer go, that's me. You go, oh, I know what that is. That's OCD. And now your brain is working with you instead of against you.
When Schwartz and his team scanned the brains of their improved patients, they found that the firing of the sticky gear shift had normalized. The brain had changed its structure in response to thought.
You're making major changes in the deep aspects of your biological nature constructively through insight, awareness, effort, and focused attention.
The OCD is kind of under my control. I feel like, wow, this is something that everybody should know. If I could go on a mountaintop and shout how great it is, I would do it. I feel like mindfulness is the way to peace inside of you.
My hands, they used to, from all the washing, they used to bleed. They used to crack at the knuckles. They used to hurt. My hands are sort of a small, like, physical testament to where I am today. The ideas that Dr. Schwartz has exposed me to, I'm eternally grateful, because they've allowed me to shape my own brain and shape the outcome of my disorder in my life.
Self-directed neuroplasticity is a real thing. You can use it to help you with your suffering.
But there are many kinds of suffering, and new advancements in neuroplasticity can rescue us from the horrendous memories that would haunt anyone.
I sort of lost 10 or 12 years of my life. I would have sort of flashbacks and nightmares. Before this happened, I was settled down, 3 golden retrievers, a girl that I loved, nice home. Something happened and I couldn't have that kind of life, because every day I would wake up and I wanted to die. I didn't want to go through another day.
PTSD is a neuroplastic disorder par excellence. A person with an often normally functioning nervous system experiences a crushing mental event that changes the meaning of their lives and fundamentally alters their nervous system. Now, as they repeatedly relive the event, it wires itself more and more deeply into their minds, further disrupting normal functioning.
Everyone was able to move on with life, but I felt like I was left behind. Sounds or anything could trigger it, and then all of a sudden you were down in this pit again.
The sound of a dog barking, the sound of kids screaming, it would just send me right back. The Rottweiler grabbed the back of my leg and started whipping me around like I was a rag doll. I could see my son trying to get out of his stroller, and it caught the attention of the dog, and the dog turned and lunged at the baby's head.
I came home from work that day and found my brother hanging in our front hallway. It's never going to be something that I'll be able to forget.
The fact that our brains are plastic also makes them vulnerable and allows trauma to alter them and create post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. But Elaine Brunet, a clinical psychologist at McGill University, has found a way to use the same neuroplasticity to cure patients of this debilitating disorder.
The sad truth is that every day people are exposed to trauma and are at risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder. Rape victims, child abuse, car accident victims, and you are changed by your experience and you're never going to be the same again. Never. We have developed a new treatment for PTSD, and this new treatment could change the way psychologists and mental health professionals treat people.
During the course of experiencing a trauma, a person and even the brain is so overwhelmed that they cannot properly file away the thoughts, feelings, and perceptions that are happening into memory. And thus, they keep emerging over and over again as though they're happening in the present.
It's like you're in hell and there's no escape. It's living with a bad memory, and the bad memory is so vivid that you're reliving it many times a day. I would really get sick. The sweating, the shaking, and the feeling like I just wanted to hide in a closet somewhere in the dark so nobody could even know that I existed.
What is required for the treatment to work is that the memory needs to be brought back.
Researchers have found that each time any mental event is brought to conscious awareness, there's a moment of heightened plasticity in its circuit. This provides an opportunity to alter that circuit and its connections, and in the case of trauma, file those mental events in their proper place in the past.
So in the treatment that we have developed, we have people think of their traumatic event under the influence of a medication. Propranolol dampens this emotional memory.
In this treatment, the patient is given a low dose of propranolol, an old drug typically used to relieve hypertension. Then, they write out a narrative account of the trauma in explicit detail.
And then they read the account of their trauma, and that lasts less than 10 minutes.
C'est le 3 septembre, 9h20. Il fait beau et je viens de commencer mon travail au magasin.
Then they come back the following week, take the drug and read their written account of their trauma, and they do this once a week for 5 more weeks.
When I first tried this, I did not think it would work because it's deceptively simple. We find that about 3/4 of the people no longer meet the criteria for PTSD after this treatment. It really changes their lives.
While working with Alain, when I wrote down what had happened to me, I found out I still had that rage. That night, I remember coming home, having nightmares again, major, and I was going, what am I getting into? And after each session, I had to read the whole story, and it was always difficult for me. La jeune commis vient de rentrer et je lui dis de s'occuper des clients pendant que je prépare ma commande. Pendant ce temps, le gars qui avait l'air nerveux me dit « Get in the back store and open the fucking safe ». We walk to the back, towards the safe, and he has the gun on my head and back.
La jeune commis arrive avec l'autre gars. Elle aussi est attachée. Elle tremble. Elle pleure. Encore une fois, il vous met le gun sur votre tête et vous demande « Where's the fucking key ?»
Je suis certain, comme je suis un témoin, qu'il va revenir et me tuer. Mon cœur bat très vite.
When I was 12, I had to have my tonsils taken out. So I was alone in the hospital. When I walked into this doctor's office, the first thing I noticed was that the walls were padded, and then he closed the door, locked it, and put the key in his pocket, and I thought, oh my God. When he started touching me, I knew that I was just caught in a trap, and that he would do whatever he wanted to do with me. When you're 12 years old and you have no idea that a man can hurt you in this way, and it was especially degrading and extremely humiliating.
Le gros noir dit à l'autre gars, go pop him. À ce moment, mon cœur bat fort et je suis sûr qu'il va mourir. Je sens le gun sur ma tête, mais il frappe la tête seulement. Je tombe par terre et je joue le mort. I think it was the 5th week. I had to read the story again, and then while reading it, all of a sudden, there was a sort of I didn't have any attachment to it. It was like reading a book. It was violent, but it wasn't me. It was something else. And I felt like smiling and laughing. And then after, I remember telling my doctor, saying, you guys have something very hot here. This is going to help a lot of people.
Because neurons that fire together wire together, every time a person who's been traumatized remembers their trauma, they're at risk of more deeply connecting the remembered trauma with the firing of the threat system. But it also turns out to be the case that neurons that fire apart wire apart. So by chemically blocking the arousal of the threat system while narrating the trauma, we can actually disconnect them. We can desynchronize them because neurons that are out of sync fail to link.
The memories don't make me suffer anymore. I still remember occasionally, but I can watch a movie that has something close to the event happening, and I don't even relate it back to my memory anymore. And then I remember, oh, I'm cured of this.
All of our new treatments for trauma take advantage of the fact that when the patient is remembering the traumatic event, the network for that memory enters a more malleable, labile state. What is unique about Alain Brunet's approach is that it uses our understanding of neuroplasticity at both the mental and biochemical levels.
We're not trying to erase people's memory. We just want to transform it into something that they can recall willingly, and which is certainly a bad memory, but a memory that belongs to the past.
You still remember everything. It's just that you don't remember them very often anymore, and it doesn't hurt you anymore. So you can just go on with life. It's a bad memory, just like everybody has bad memories, and it's not a trauma anymore.
Some of my dear friends that have known me for years, they said, oh, the old Joel is back. I have ambition, I have a drive to live again, and I appreciate things. And it can be just simple emotions, falling in love again, and wow, that's fun. I'd miss that.
Now that we're understanding how neuroplasticity can be applied to mental disorders, what's next? Can this knowledge of the plastic brain even help treat schizophrenia? Sofia Vinogradov has spent her career researching schizophrenia, an illness in which the sufferer often can't distinguish what is real from what is not.
It's fascinating because it's a window into how the brain operates. It helps you think about, what is memory, what makes us human. I mean, all these are very, very cool questions. But I was getting increasingly frustrated by the fact that nothing in what I was doing was really actively supporting new ideas about how people could actually get better.
But when she began to realize that the schizophrenic brain, though ill, is nonetheless neuroplastic, new treatment approaches opened up. If her current approach is right, and there are strong signs it is, we will be treating people with schizophrenia in a new way just a few years from now.
It's actually the worst disease on the face of the earth. You live a totally isolated life, sometimes with very little friends and contacts.
What you hear in your head can be very scary. The words when I first got sick was kill, 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 and I did not know what to do about it.
I just thought of myself as a silent witness to horror. It's like another world or a twilight zone when there's no answers and you don't know what's happening to your child and you can't believe the behavior and there's nobody to turn to ask a question.
It's all in my head, and I cannot take a vacation from my head. Everybody can take a vacation every once in a while, but not me.
Molly Hamaker runs a center just outside San Francisco that gives people with mental illness, including schizophrenia, a place to receive support and assistance while reintegrating themselves into society.
When families hear the diagnosis, it's kind of like the cancer diagnosis for mental health. And I know this because when my own daughter became ill and then was diagnosed as having schizophrenia, we went through extraordinary grief. We felt that our daughter was basically snatched away from us.
6 years ago, Molly's daughter, Alita, started hearing voices.
I remember it was strongly connected to the experience of doing yoga, and I thought my yoga teacher was sending me telepathic messages, and that was like the beginning of it. I was bombarded by voices all the time. It's just scary that I was so convinced the voices were the truth. They'd say things like, you are psychic, you have supernatural powers, and so that kind of made me feel good. But they also told me some horrible things, like my whole family was infected with HIV. Some pretty disturbing things, actually. Here's a picture when I was psychotic. I don't think I was being honest about my voices.
It was really the worst moment of my life as a mother. And it was like she was there, but not there.
People diagnosed with schizophrenia typically have a constellation of 3 different kinds of symptoms. The first kind are called the positive symptoms, and this includes hallucinations and delusions. Second, there are the negative symptoms, and these include apathy, an inability to express emotion, and a general lack of goal-directed behavior or action. And third, there are cognitive deficits, problems with memory, concentration, and even the organization of one's own thoughts.
There's a range of cognitive impairments that we find in schizophrenia in many of the really key domains of functioning for the brain, and that can range from attention, the ability of the brain to focus and sustain attention. The signal is kind of being dispersed in ways that are not as crisp and integrated as one might wish. And so the brain, in a sense, is struggling with a lot of noise in the system. If the brain is having trouble with that is going to impair many aspects of day-to-day functioning. It's going to be much more difficult to simply learn and understand new information.
Neuroplasticians had recently shown that it was possible to take children with learning disorders and develop brain exercises for them so that they could function at normal and even above normal levels. So it made good sense to see whether the same thing could be done with people with schizophrenia. Dr. Michael Merzenich is a neuroscientist who is a giant amongst neuroplasticians, particularly for his ability to take work in the lab out into the world at large to help people.
Not only is your brain plastic, but the schizophrenic's brain is plastic. And that means that we have the potential to drive that brain in a corrective direction.
His ideas were extremely fascinating. They were intriguing to me. I was eager to see how we could apply them. But there was a part of me that had a fairly healthy dose of skepticism because I was, again, operating from that model, a very nihilistic model, which is that this is a broken brain and it's irretrievably broken. And how are you possibly going to move it in more adaptive directions?
What was going to move the brain in more adaptive directions was a simple-looking video game.
Click on the hospital.
Simple on the surface, but actually a highly sophisticated tool designed to stimulate the brain to repair its underperforming areas.
5, 2, 3, 3, 2.
For instance, patients with schizophrenia typically have cognitive difficulties with verbal processing, difficulties recognizing words, encoding words, and retrieving words, all of which are necessary for us to manipulate information in working memory.
That fundamental breakdown in keeping track and holding things in memory is something that we've known for a long time is to some extent improvable by forms of intensive training.
A series of video games was designed to correct this and other deficits in the schizophrenic brain. Merzenich, working with a team of neuroscientists including Henry Monka, designed numerous exercises that are deceptively simple.
So I'm going to show you an exercise called high or low. And this is an auditory exercise. It works on your hearing system, and it's designed to improve what we call speed of processing. So listen carefully. So those are two little sweeps of sound, and one of them went down and one of them went up. And I'm just going to tell the computer, well, the first one went down and the second one went up. Now, why is that important? Well, hearing quickly is important. If you're going to follow a pattern of speech in which there are many rapid sounds, you need to have a brain that can keep up with how fast those sounds come in. And if your brain doesn't keep up, you won't be able to follow the thread of a conversation. And that's, of course, exactly the kind of memory problems that people with schizophrenia suffer from.
4, 1.
So in all of these exercises, they're designed to start off easy so that even a person with very strong impairments can do them, and then progressively and incrementally get more and more challenging so that you can drive a person to very high levels of performance.
3, 1, 4, 3.
So now I'm going to show you an executive function exercise.
5, 1, 4.
They're going to see a number of objects on the screen, and they're going to hear a number that's spoken.
1, 1, 2.
People with
5.
mental illness often have a hard time integrating that information, and they either stick with just what they see or just what they hear.
We decided to begin a study to see if this approach would be effective. Really, at that point, I was interested, it was more feasibility than anything. Would people with schizophrenia come in and do this? And if they do this, does it work?
5, 3, 4, 4, 4, 2, 5, 1.
The call went out for participants, and Molly's daughter, Alita, became one of them.
The first time I went in there, I walked out and I was really upset to be there. I wasn't on medication, and I think the voices were telling me, you don't want to do this. Doing the video game, sometimes I didn't want to do it. I was kind of like, oh, I have to do this again. But I could sometimes sort of feel something in my brain happening a little bit. Like I could feel a little more focused or a little bit from it.
4, 1, 4, 3, 5.
The improvements were looking kind of maybe even more robust than I might have guessed.
We have 12 patients who are assigned to the cognitive training. And
Amazingly, those getting the treatment showed increases in cognitive processing speed, verbal language skills, and verbal retention.
in these frontal regions after these.
We found that their improvement in that kind of a task had improved to the point that it really probably would start to be somewhat meaningful in terms of day-to-day life.
So
Brain imaging also showed that the participants' brains were changing, beginning to look less like schizophrenic brains and more like the brains of people without mental illness.
after training, they're able to recruit the same region that the healthy controls are able to recruit.
Yeah, that's some very cool results.
Yeah, it is. It's certainly very cool. It's evidence of neural plasticity.
Good to see you. When I think of Alita now, I think of her as recovered. She is really Alita again.
I feel like I'm doing well, but I feel like I could always be doing better. I think sometimes just accepting the fact that I have schizophrenia is a little challenging for me, but I see myself probably always taking my medication. I think it's a great tool for healing and recovery.
The idea that a computer game can actually defeat some symptoms of schizophrenia might seem implausible to anyone raised in a pre-neuroplastic era.
We know that there are abnormal patterns in the brain of someone who has schizophrenia. What we seem to be showing is that after the cognitive training, the brain activation patterns are in a sense normalizing.
But Vinogradov and her fellow researchers know there's something to what they did with that video game, causing incremental changes that might not be as sudden as those that occur with a drug. Which is why they're branching out and testing their theory on other types of people with schizophrenia with studies that might prove this little video game holds huge potential.
1, 3, 5.
Even for long-term sufferers who now might find hope where, up till now, there's been very little. When severe mental illness goes untreated, the sad results are often seen in any downtown area in any large city around the world. Sofia Vinogradov is running a study in downtown San Francisco. The purpose is to see what effect the neuroplastic treatment has on those who've been living with schizophrenia for a very long time, the chronic sufferers. People with schizophrenia frequently have cognitive problem-solving difficulties that make it difficult to hold a job, maintain a relationship, or function in everyday life. So a cognitive intervention that improves problem-solving skills is a major advance for schizophrenic patients. Charles Stackhouse was diagnosed with schizophrenia 41 years ago.
Do you still hear voices?
Yeah, all the time, yeah.
What do the voices say to you now?
Well, it's like more like whispers now, you know, and I ignore them because I have some really good medication that helps me to relax with it, you know.
Have you heard voices today?
Oh yeah, all the time, yeah.
So the notion is we're going to deliver the cognitive training. So hopefully we're getting the brain to be better and better at thinking and learning, and now we're going to have people who are getting that training also get a set of skills and support to go back to work.
It takes a lot of effort, you know, to really apply myself. If I'm successful, you know, I feel successful when I come in and do these programs.
In yet another study, using the same concepts, Vinogradov is seeing what effect the software training has on social abilities, an ever-present deficit in those with schizophrenia.
We're developing some more sets of exercises that are going to target areas we have not yet targeted, in this case social cognition, so the ability to process information that is related to really being able to read expressions on people's faces, understand nuances in the voice, and so on. So it's going to be a very real-world test.
What do you feel that you've gained from the training?
I feel like I'm waking up. Ever since I started here, I'm getting to be more involved in things.
And you've done such a good job.
Yeah.
Really, the next step where we have to go is we have to apply this to younger people. So the idea was, well, if we can come in early in the course of illness with an intervention that's going to improve cognition, we might actually change the whole course, the whole trajectory of someone's life.
Hallie Farwood is 21 years old. She doesn't have schizophrenia, but has displayed some early warning symptoms.
I was in high school and I was really depressed and hospitalized for a little while.
A couple of years ago, Hallie began having the occasional delusion.
I did keep thinking that I was hearing electrical sounds, like a ringing telephone or a little like ding that says you have a message on your computer, or like I kept thinking that someone had left the fan on downstairs, but really they hadn't.
Hallie was exactly the type of person Sofia Vinogradov was looking for.
Because these are such precious subjects, we're having them go through.
Vinogradov and her researchers are, among others, racing to identify and treat people who don't have schizophrenia now, but who are already experiencing symptoms that often evolve into the illness.
So they might not have full-blown hallucinations, but from time to time maybe they're starting to have unusual beliefs or interests in things which are a little bit on the edge of unusual, but they're not frankly delusional.
So what we're doing is trying to target that year or two before the full illness onset. The hypothesis is that the cognitive training will improve people's attention, memory, and then potentially that it may even prevent the onset of full psychosis.
I remember the program being somewhat monotonous. As there being any benefit, I don't think it really had any particular effect on me. I still have a terribly vivid imagination.
Neuroplastic interventions are based on exercising the brain. So like all exercise, they're incremental and change takes place over time. Sometimes it's even imperceptible to the patient as it's occurring, but the changes do show up on tests that the patients do.
One of our unexpected findings was with a measure that was actually from the blood called BDNF. BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and it's a compound that is found in the brain. It can be thought of as the brain's fertilizer.
People with schizophrenia typically have lower than normal BDNF levels, but astonishingly, after 10 weeks of receiving the computer training, their BDNF increased to normal.
And so this was some really interesting evidence that something was changing biologically in the systems of people who got the cognitive training, and this something had to do or shared some relationship with this interesting molecule called BDNF.
This is medicine. This has outcomes that are medical. It changes brains physically. It changes them chemically. It changes them functionally. In fact, it changes them on a broader scale because we're driving these complex natural processes than does any pill that you can take.
What Vinogradov hopes for is the development of a new approach to dealing with schizophrenia. One that is a 3-level approach.
Medications will be one piece of that, but some form of cognitive enhancement or cognitive training is going to be a second piece. And I'm hopeful that the work we've been doing is setting the stages for that kind of treatment. Then, of course, the third area is to take that brain, which is now functioning in a much more efficient, better fashion, and let the person learn the skills, the work skills, the social skills that they need to establish the recovery that is going to be meaningful for them. So I really see treatment as being this 3-pronged approach.
5, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, 5.
Sofia Vinogradov's studies will be complete in just a few years, and perhaps that is when schizophrenia treatment throughout the world will undergo a neuroplastic revolution.
I think there's every reason to be extremely hopeful now in terms of the treatment of schizophrenia. We're learning that the earlier you intervene, the better your outcomes. We now are beginning to develop sort of these novel approaches to treatment that no one had sort of really considered. There's every reason to expect that people will make a recovery and will go on to have satisfying lives.
What we're thinking about is true correction. The machine is intact. There's nothing in most of these conditions missing. We're trying to drive the machine, which is plastic, reversibly plastic, back as far and completely as possible in a way that actually corrects itself. The whole idea is to help the person get back in life and connect with their family again and connect with the world again in ways that can help them live a happier life.
One of the deepest things about neuroplasticity is that it shows that we can make choices about what our brain is doing to us, and we can focus our attention in different ways, in adaptive ways, and when you do that, you align your brain with the greater good.
When we think of neuroplasticity, we tend to think of what we like about it, that it gives rise to more flexible behaviors. But in fact, neuroplasticity is no one's friend, not yours or mine, because it can equally give rise to rigid behaviors, as happens in OCD or PTSD or even in psychosis, when negative thoughts repeated get wired more and more deeply into the brain. But while neuroplasticity is not our friend, understanding it is, and it's that understanding that's allowing us, in many cases now, to reverse the course of illnesses that we thought were intractable.